Welcome, my friends and enemies. Glad you are here. Trying a little bit of a difference in the lighting because I have a very white face and I can't get around it. And yeah, so I'm not gonna blast my eyes with more whiteness than necessary. So hopefully a little bit of color. If I lean back, the screen's just large enough and close enough to my face that it's gonna blast my face. But anyway, that sounded kind of gay. Uh, anyway, I wanted to do a reaction to a video that I enjoyed when I watched it, but I had things to say on it, and not necessarily in contradiction. I just had things I wanted to add to it. So, if you'll bear with me.
When I started this channel, it was largely because I had been noticing a broad decline in storytelling in general and literature in.
I also kind of want to preface with I think she makes really good videos. She speaks a lot of sense. She's competent, that kind of a thing. So, it's kind of where I'm starting with this.
In particular, a decline that began a lot longer ago than most people think. And my aim has always been to help, insofar as I am able, to remind writers of the true fundamentals of storytelling, and to hopefully elevate their craft into something that isn't beholden to current market trends nor controlled by the fleeting tastes of book talk or bookstagram or whatever. However, I've been noticing
Which are extremely degenerate places right now. So,
that there are a lot more aspects that have been contributing to the decline of literature besides just a lack of understanding regarding the fundamentals. Today, I would like to focus on one of the most glaring issues plaguing modern publishing.
well, that'll do it. It's all about smut. It's all about smut.
Something you hear a lot is that women have come to dominate the literary world more and more. We'll look closer at those numbers later, but for now, I think we can all agree.
I mean, one question that initially hits me is why are they dominating the current world of literacy?
That female writers have achieved fame and success comparable to a lot of their male predecessors and contemporaries. But the female writing, which is most often presented as proof of this, is things like this, despite the fact that there have always existed things like this. I'm personally of the opinion that the literary world is so rife with corruption and ideologies that any observation along these lines is meaningless.
I mean, she's not wrong. She's definitely not wrong.
Generally, across the board, it isn't really men or women who dominate the literary world, it's ideologies and popular trends in social politics, whatever those might be at a given time.
And those are things that it shouldn't be what confirms or denies someone's ability to be in a space like book publishing and whatnot, because unless you're talking about a specific topic like, say, politics or ideology, or and it's something in the professional academic type of world, you shouldn't be talking specifically about that kind of a thing. So like if you're talking about politics, well, you're talking about politics. You're either going to be one showing one side or another side. And that could expand to however many sides there are to the topic. But you're either going to have those sides or you're going to hold to a kind of indifferent side right in the middle that kind of just like, here's all of these, let's cover them, but it might not be my stance that I hold. So if you're doing like academia, you're talking about a particular topic. Who cares what your politics are? If you're talking about politics, some people might care about your politics. If you're writing about ideologies, someone might care about your ideologies, but if somebody has an opposing ideology to potentially the book publishers themselves, that shouldn't be what stops them from getting it out there. But when you're focusing on ideology or politics, typically the people who are in charge don't want the opposite view to be out there because they might gain support or sympathy. So, not much you can do in that particular vicinity.
Historically, a lot, not all, but a lot of the most widely celebrated female writers, especially within the 20th and 21st centuries, have been at the bleeding edge of social and political progressivism. To my mind, this makes it less about being a woman and more about being an acolyte of a particular ideology.
Which is true, because if you're a woman and you go against whatever the publishers are stating as their goal, their end, and that justifies the means, whatever, um, they're not going to just let you on and do stuff because it's going to go counter. So like, if you're ideologically opposed to smut, they're not going to let you post something as a book that opposes smut, because it would contradict their very work that they're trying to push so they can make money. And I do find it funny because we've kind of always had smut. It's called the romance genre. Like, it's always been there, but it was never like at the front. Like, you knew, if I'm going to the romance section, I'm going to get smut. If you were going to go to the bookstore, you knew where you were going because you knew you were looking for smut. Well, now it's like, it's that hiddenness in plain sight where it's like, check out this it's a cool fantasy book that looks interesting, and it's literally just smut. It's not entirely based on fantasy with little droppets. It's like, it's just flooded through the work, and whatever the work might be, it turns out it's actually pretty nasty stuff, apparently.
Like I said, though, not always, just most of the time. Nevertheless, it is somewhat true that right now women somewhat dominate the publishing industry.
That's because they don't let men into the publishing industry, which there should be lawsuits for, but that's a different story. Personally, I think all the publishing book companies should all be broken up into multiple smaller publishers, but that would at least prevent the ideology from being like, anytime somebody discriminates against another author, get it cracked open. Because like, if you're saying, well, we don't take you because you're a man, you're white, and you're of an opinion we don't like, if that's your goals, which has been stated to several authors, mind you, not just like, oh, it's a hearsay. No. Several authors have stated, I can't get my book published outside of a self-publishing or a super tiny publishing company that doesn't have a whole lot of sway, doesn't have a whole lot of reach. So you can't argue like, well, it's anecdotal. Well, it's anecdotal for several people. It's not anecdotal to just one individual instance, and then that's it. But you can also just look at the books coming out and notice there's a staggering amount of men not being published, especially in the fantasy area.
First of all, some
I
housekeeping.
share her
Apparently, I will be
size.
punished in some mysterious way if I use a certain word in my videos. This word has 4 letters, starts with a P, ends with an N, and there's also an O and an R in there too. So for the course of this video, I'll have
Because YouTube doesn't understand how words work. That's a different story.
to refer to it differently. I'm going to use
I mean, I guess on my side of the internet, we call it corn.
adult entertainment or adult videos or explicit videos. I don't know. None of these words quite have the same meaning, but you and I both know what we're talking about here, so let's just make do. All right, to start with, let's just push aside any conversation about taste. This is not going to be a video about what I like or don't like to read. What I am offering you in this video is not my opinion or my reading preference, it is facts. And the first thing we need to establish is that all this so-called romance fiction and most, if not all, of the current women's literature out there is not women's literature. It's, as a woman,
It's corn. Um, I mean, it could be corn aimed at a particular sex, we'll say. So it could be considered women's literature. Um, I would say it's misplaced when the main content is smut. I would say it ceases to be a fantasy, a military, a sci-fi, whatever the case might be, because it's just smut, which is by definition romance, although romance could probably split into multiple categories, where one is like the true love romance with just some steamy sex every once in a while. But nowadays it's crazy stuff. Like, old romance and current smut aren't even in the same category anymore. So I agree, and also think it's technically possible, as a disagreement, I guess. It's not actually disagreeing, but it's also possible for it to be in an odd place, because it's still romance. They're just trying to. That's what it's called, romantasy, is because it's smut fantasy. That's just what it is. So calling it what it is, smut fantasy, it's romantasy. It's romance fantasy. Well, the first half is romance. But if there's more romance and it's more extreme, and the fantasy is not as extreme, it's kind of dull and lame comparatively in terms of percentage, well, it's a romance. I'm not saying you can't have romance in a fantasy, but we don't call it romantasy. We call it fantasy, and it just happens to have romance. Like, Wheel of Time has romantasy. Like, it has romance in it. It has sexual content, albeit not explicit, but it has that content there. We know what happens. You read it, you can put two and two together, because it takes two to tango, and they tangoing. But you don't see anything, pun intended. I mean, you don't read anything, but you don't visualize or see anything. Nothing happens through the book. But you know what happened. You know it was sweaty. You know it was dirty. You know they did the deed. You know what happened. You're not that thick, right? So we look at it and say, look, it's a fantasy, but it has that in it. But the rest, that's not even like 2% of a book or a book series, right? It's not the main purpose. But when you get to romantasy, it's every possible time you could do it. Boom, there's a smut scene. Boom, there's a smut scene. Boom, there's more smut than there is fantasy. It's not a fantasy, it's romance. Because you could argue every single romance novel that's out from the past 20, 30, 40 years, it's a fantasy. It's not real. Like, it's we call it fantasy because it's in a particular genre, in a particular world. But if your focus is romance, well, you can put it in any world whatsoever, and it doesn't matter. But it wouldn't technically, definitionally be sci-fi. It wouldn't definitionally necessarily be fantasy. It could be a murder mystery or whatever, but you'd still classify it as romance, because romance is the point. Smut is the point. It's not, the point isn't the rest of the world. The point is you getting hot and bothered by the content.
The most common defense I hear for romance fiction, especially the romance fiction that is so prevalent today, is that it is literature for women. Whenever anyone tries to express some concern about these genres or the nature of their content, that person is immediately condemned for being anti-woman or anti-women's literature. The idea being that these types of books are not just popular among women, but that they define womanhood, and to be opposed to them
That would be ridiculous, because the only thing that can define womanhood is a woman, not the book they read.
in any way is to be opposed to women.
Does that mean, I guess, does that mean that you're not a woman if you read Lord of the Rings because it's not for women? Like, no, that's ridiculous. That's absurd.
Women such as myself who are critical of these books are often said to be suffering from internalized misogyny. The reality about
Aren't we all, to some extent, because of those type of people that say that? I mean, you could say I have internalized, I'm an internalized misandrist towards men that are betas and that are whipped or whatever. Like, to some extent, there are women you don't like, and you'll be accused of being a misogynist because of that. It doesn't mean you dislike all women. And to some extent, there are men you dislike, and you'll be accused of being a misandrist. But that doesn't mean you dislike all men. So the idea that just because you dislike a person because they're spouting some drivel or they promote some drivel doesn't mean that you hate the entire sex. Like, use an example that's pretty common and people like to poke fun out of, especially the outliers. Geeks and Gamers has, well, several guys that constantly say things that are construed as misogynistic. But then they have a girl, or two girls, or three girls, or multiple girls. Half the crew is girls. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm totally misogynist. Blah, 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 blah. It's just like, they're obviously not, because they wouldn't bring on women if they didn't like women. That's just how that works. It's a joke. It's a sidestep from like what people accuse them of, but like leaning into it. They're leaning into it. Like Ryan Cannell's not a racist per se in the realistic term. Like he doesn't actually go out and like blast black people or anything. But he plays the part because he's leaning into this thing that everybody accuses him of being. It's like, no, he just hates people. He just hates people. Okay, whatever. That doesn't mean he dislikes it. Like, you can't say he's a misogynist. He has a podcast with Vara Dark, who's a woman. Like, people don't think very difficultly about literally anything these days.
All this is that it isn't a question of woman versus anti-woman or even woman versus man. The issue here is probably one of the oldest ones in existence. It's the normalization of explicit adult entertainment. Whether it's women or men who are trying to do that is pretty irrelevant, because the number one reason anyone has ever tried to normalize this kind of, explicit content is money. But I'm getting
And ideology. Money and ideology.
a little ahead of myself. First of all, we need to establish this fact very, very clearly. Women's literature is not, just some randomly horny trend in the book industry. In that sense, outside of a handful of odd entries here and there, women's literature doesn't exist. Women haven't taken over the literary world. A four-letter word starting with P has taken over the literary world. Barnes & Noble and every other...
Although that four-letter word that starts with P, aka corn, it's targeting women. It's not targeting men, because men are more visual where women are more detailed. And that's just how we are. Where men are more visual, women like details. They want the whole setup.
Major and independent bookseller, especially all those new romance bookshops, have now just become another kind of adult entertainment store. And no, that's not a good thing. Now, I know what you might be thinking.
An entire shop dedicated explicitly to just smut. It seems a bit excessive, and even a person who loves smut to the very depth of their soul should be like, you don't have anything else? Like a cookbook? Oh, it's a cookbook for, how to cover your significant other in, ice cream and put cherry on their nipples. How about a regular cookbook? Like just recipes of just normal stuff? Oh no, you don't carry that? Oh, okay.
This is not XXX adult entertainment. This is. You are actually incorrect. For a man, average man, I don't know, reading an explicit depiction of a sex act might not really get the job done. Men typically tend to gravitate towards seeing the act on the screen in one form or another. Women have always, on average, preferred to read it, even if some do end up hooked on the filmed version. The female mind has pretty much the same reaction, generally speaking, to the written version. In fact, written erotic content tends to have even more of an impact on the minds of women than filmed erotic content. Why? Because men and women engage with media in fundamentally different ways. When it comes to adult entertainment, your simple, straightforward two people banging video isn't really going to do much of anything for a woman, generally speaking. There have been numerous studies done regarding female sexuality or the differences between male and female arousal, and generally across the board, they'll tell you that women require what is sometimes called mental mapping to be sexually aroused. That is, there needs to be more story and more opportunity for her to feel empathy. That's just how it is for a woman. Empathy is a huge factor for women in all aspects of their lives, but yes, especially when it comes to erotic media. With written explicit content, as opposed to your typical material found on the hub, it's a lot easier for the woman to imagine herself as the female in the scene. In addition, as I said, women require an emotional element to their erotic content that is almost impossible in the simple filmed scenes that can so easily do it for men, typically. That is to say, watching Mrs. Smith bang
Again, visual versus contextual mediums.
the mailman while her husband is at work is plenty for most men, but a woman will want to know the whole story. She'll want this sexual tension that builds up between Mrs. Smith and the mailman over several encounters. the dangerous possibility that her husband might come home any minute, the explicit fact that the male
It's the thrill. And also, is the mailman getting it on with all the housewives, or is it just her? Is she special, or something of that nature?
man chose her over all of the other housewives on the street, and so on and so on. A woman would also prefer some kind of story to bind it all together. That's just how women are. If you put explicit sex scenes into a novel-length story, it's going to hit a woman's mind in much the same way the top video on the hub hits a guy. As I said, that's just how women are. A lot of men might hear this and be a little dubious, and in fact, I've found that a lot of men, while they might raise their eyebrows a little at just how explicit women's books have become in recent years, they won't really go as far as to categorize them the same way as, you know, the kind of thing you'd find on the hub. Male writers certainly find such classification baffling, but let me break down how this works for women. If you look at your average popular romantasy book, those books that have dominated book sales for a few years now, and which are among the worst offenders when it comes to wildly explicit content, the explicit scenes coincide with the story to some degree. Now, the authors of these stories will tell you that these sex scenes are there for narrative purposes. They serve either plot development or character development. I don't think that's necessarily true, but let's go with it. Keep in mind what I said about how women engage with erotic content versus how men do. Let's take Sarah J. Maas, for example. I shouldn't have to tell you who she is and why she's relevant to this conversation, but if you don't know, let me just say that she's the woman responsible for the series of books commonly referred to as skilled writers such as
Fairy corn. Yeah, I know who she is because I even have friends that are guys that are like, you need to check out her work. Not that particular series, so to speak. She has a different series that's like, oh, you need to check this out. And it's just like, what about the content intrigues you? It's like, oh, it's a really good writer. I'm like, right. I haven't read it yet, but if I ever have a chance to actually pick up a book again, then maybe I can.
Maas understand how the story shape of all aspects of storytelling affects reader engagement. We've talked about this before on this channel. Stories, and even their individual components, must have a story shape. That is, at least one character trying to achieve a goal with some kind of opposition to that goal, culminating in a mini climax in which the character achieves success or failure, or some unexpected thing happens. That's a story shape. Mass is actually pretty good at using this story shape to create fairly well-paced, if highly formulaic stories that really draw the reader in. I mean, anyone can write smut, but not everyone can sell millions of copies worldwide. Whether or not her stories are good stories, I don't. The point is,
and that's the thing, is it's like, if she was writing fantasy and she had like a smut scene here or there, like in 500 pages or whatever, or 500 to 800 pages, and you had like two or three, and they were just kind of like, you know, what you'd expect to fit the contextual sense of the scene, I don't think it'd be that big of a deal. But it's when it's pervasive throughout the entire work, and it has this sense of just, well, obvious. Well, why wouldn't I write a whole series about sex and then just sprinkle some fantasy into it?
she understands how the thing works. But then she applies this same story shape to her sex scenes. Of course, I shouldn't have to tell you how sex scenes themselves have a story shape. She has stated in many interviews that she endeavors to make sure her sex is plot relevant. A big way she does that is to have the erotic scenes take place at the come down immediately after a major plot mini climax. This incorporates the emotional release of the narrative with the sexual release of the erotic scene.
So, Throne of Glass right there is the one that we're talking about. And it's it's like the whole, you know, they storm the castle, they free the princess, the knight who frees the princess, like, takes off his helmet and his clothes and just pushes her against the wall. They start going at it, and this is like, so they're victorious. So you hit that climax because they had that clash between two, the protagonist and the antagonist, or an antagonist, and after succeeding and breaking through, and you get that euphoria of we've won victory, and you've either killed the bad guy or captured the bad guy, and then now you get the girl. Well, now you do things with the girl, and that's like a consistent, like, let's do this over and over again.
She stated that she often tries to make the significant sex scenes, such as that 2 or 3 day sex marathon, occur at the close of equally significant plot arcs. This is ideal for the female brain, which already seeks a story shape even in sexually explicit content. But from a reader engagement plus female adult entertainment perspective, this means that Mass has doubly hooked her female readers. The story and the extremely explicit content have become inextricably linked, and the explicit aspects have been delivered via the story in precisely the most.
But just because they've been linked does not mean it was linked necessarily well, as in like the story overall is still good. They might be linked well, as in the sex scene fits the instance in which it's trying to be inserted into, but it doesn't mean that the story's good because of that.
Ideal way necessary to capture the infatuation of the female reader. Another interesting thing to note, if you're not yet sold on the fact that all of this so-called women's lit is little more than, four-letter word starts with P, have a look at how much women's fiction has become subject to categorization norms that you don't see outside like the hub or fan fiction, which has become just another form of debauched adult entertainment. Sure, yeah, okay, fan fiction that isn't smut does theoretically exist, I guess, but that's like saying there are non-explicit OnlyFans creators. Within those spheres, the common term used for this categorization is a narrative one, or even a literary one. Trope. People talk about tropes all the time. Tropes are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. They're a common tool for literary analysis. A little
Just don't misuse them. That's the key.
reductive, a little ridiculously overutilized, but benign in themselves. But the important factor to note here is this. When it comes to women's arousal, they need far more specific things than men do. So a woman's sexual entertainment tastes will always be 1,000 times more specific than a man's. So when a woman seeks out a new book, she'll look for specific cocktails of tropes for that thing she needs to feed her specific hungers. Or, I guess, thirsts. A quick perusal of the book recommendation section of the romance books subreddit will destroy any remaining illusions you might have had that these books are about anything other than sexual arousal. Just take a moment and look at some of these.
Basically, they're trying to satisfy their own curiosities and their own "I wish this happened to me" in um if I was the character of the story. So like, you know, female character has big boobs and a chubby body, and the male character likes it or whatever. Like, because they want to be the female character. They have big boobs and they have a chubby body, and they want the male character to like them. First time having sex without a condom. Well, you haven't done it, so you want to fantasize about it, so you want to read about other people. This is just has voyeuristic written all over it.
Can you honestly say that this attitude towards women's fiction has to do with anything other than sex? I spent a little time while I was researching this subject talking to women and reading the accounts of women who were struggling with the addiction to hardcore content. A solid 90 to 95% of them started with erotic fiction, or smut, as they often called it, and fan fiction. A few stated that they didn't really ever get into videos, often because videos couldn't feed their precise needs. Several mentioned that they had quit the video content only.
Well, it's like saying, I didn't do video content because the thing I wanted wasn't there. Now, if you're familiar with romantasy and things like, was it the Milk Farm? I've talked about that on other ones. I think she brings it up, but it's bestiality. Well, you're not going to find real people, having sex with, or a real woman having sex with a minotaur. Well, for one, minotaurs don't exist, but two, they're animals, and three, that's illegal pretty much everywhere except for very explicit places. So you're not going to have that because, well, let's be real. You're not going to be able to do that. So what they do is they go for books, because for whatever reason it's not illegal in books. Probably because it's not a real person doing an act. It's like talking about it. It's not the same as doing. But
to fall back on erotic fiction, and had happily arrived at the realization that there was functionally no difference between the two. I read an account from one woman who noted that she preferred written smut because within books and fan fiction she was able to find things that would have been illegal in video form. So that's nice. I learned too that there was a worryingly large subset of these women, some as young as 17, whose tastes became so depraved so quickly that they were now suffering from something called POCD. I'll let you look that one up yourself. Several women and teenagers remarked that they wished they had never started reading erotic fiction when they were younger, as they believed it had destroyed their lives. The thing is, just as with people's taste in hardcore video subgenres, these tastes, these hungers, will intensify over time. The same mechanic is at play as you see in men who have to constantly seek harder and harder filmed content in order to even be aroused. For that reason, more and more women's fiction has been including very, very dark material, be it disturbing age gaps, torture, abuse, even rape. Women don't start out wanting fantasy fiction. That's something that happens over time as they become desensitized to more mainstream content. I don't know how many videos and reviews I've seen by very young teenage girls who say the explicit sex in Sarah J. Maas's books is very mediocre and vanilla. That would be because they're already desensitized and crave harder content. Honestly, though, by now I should.
I think guys also go through that too, where despite having a visual medium, whether it be real life or on the hub or something of that nature, I think it's more like once they have experienced something, they have that hunger or thirst for more, and so they ramp it up a notch. And then when that's satisfied, they ramp it up a notch. And when that's satisfied, they ramp it up a notch. And then they might find eventually that they have a thing for whatever the notch that they end up on is like, oh, that's actually the thing I like. And then they constantly look for that thing. And I mean, you could argue that nowadays is like, it's totally flip on its head from the topic, but it's like guys going out and saying, I'm looking, like my dream kink is finding a woman who loves me for me, getting married, having kids, and having a traditional life. But it's like that's a kink now. Like what? So you could argue that, because it's just how debauched everything is, and eventually, and this kind of happens, I think, to everyone in civilization over time, eventually, one way or the other, where something becomes so extreme on one end that the people that come after are kind of disgusted by it. They're like, we don't want anything to do with that. And then they change the culture because obviously the older heads die off and the younger heads are coming in and saying, we're going to do something entirely different. And that's where you get like an extreme like sexual revolution. Well, once all the sexual revolution folks are out, the Puritans, younger generation, are coming in saying, let's blot this out because we don't want this. This is disgusting. This is terrible. It's bad for this X, Y, or Z reasons. That's why those things happen.
Have convinced you that these books are merely mass-produced hardcore adult entertainment and that their readership consumes them in much the same.
Which is why it's ironic if you go to somebody's house and they're like hardcore against corn, and then you look on their bookshelf and they've got so much smut romanticy stuff on there, and you're like, it's the same thing. It's just because it's a book and not a DVD, or it's not a poster, or whatever this thing might be. It's because it's a book. It's okay.
Way one would consume.
I guess I'll add that an additional point to that. It's like, children having sex in books is considered bad, right? Well, it is in real life. So it would be bad in books, right? Well, have you read It by Stephen King? It's got a sewer orgy between a bunch of kids. Basically a gangbang of like a girl by a whole bunch of guys because the plot demands it. It's like, that's okay? We can still sell that? We can still have that? Like, that's okay? Well, I guess anything goes then, doesn't it? But if you put it into a visual medium, hold the phone. But because we can have it in book form, it's okay. There's no consistency, we'll put it that way.
Any other form of, four-letter word starts with P, and that the result of that consumption, especially on a large enough scale and on a long enough timeline, is pretty much the same as any other form of
I'm just going to throw this out there. I want her PC. Because it looks better than mine.
hardcore entertainment addiction. So let's move on. Now, let's assume that you can get someone to concede that, yes, this is all, a written form of the same kind of crap you'd find on the hub. At that point, what happens is someone will
Somebody tells me she's not a frequent visitor of the hub. She's like, crap.
Insist that this is somehow the ethical type of adult entertainment. We'll get to that. Or they'll start trying to argue that this kind of written explicit content has positive effects. I've heard all these arguments. I've heard people say that the heavy amount of sex in these books creates some kind of sex positive environment for female empowerment. I've heard people say that books like these increase
I still don't know what that means. What is sex positive like if you're in a healthy environment of a relationship, namely married, it's always sex positive, or it should always be sex positive. If it's not, like if you're looking to marry somebody and somebody's and the concept in their head is that sex is only explicitly for procreation and they don't want you to touch them any other time, that's not going to be a healthy relationship. Sorry, that's just how it works. Counseling and therapy and freaking, whether it be philosophical, theological, otherwise, like, that's just how it is. The intimacy is not there the same way when you don't have that sexual content. So you can be sex positive in even a super traditional home. Like, you could be extremely sex positive in a traditional home. Even though people don't think you could do that in like a religious home, you could still be a extremely sex positive, even in a religious home, because I guess it depends on the religion. Because it's a part of intimacy. It's a part of getting closer and closer together and being on the same wavelength. It's the fact that somebody's like, oh, well, we need to create this sex positive environment in our heads by reading a book about fake stuff, especially hardcore fake stuff. I don't know how that makes sex positive. Now, maybe they mean like sex positive is like I can blatantly show my sex positive books or media. Well, that might be a little bit different, especially when you got kids in the house or something, but that doesn't have anything to do with it just being a sex positive relationship. If you're having a sex positive relationship outside of marriage, you have a whole other bunch of problems on your hands that are going to evolve into something unhealthy. And that's just counseling and therapy and stuff like that. Just show that. So it is what it is.
Readers' empathy. I've also, as I've said, been told that objecting to literature like this is inherently anti-women. First of all, let's talk about empathy.
Wouldn't it be pro-women because you're trying to have women experience better?
And the chemical reaction romance novels have on the female brain. There are so few studies that have been done on adult film's impact on women, and almost zero studies that have been done on erotic literature's impact on women. This is one of the most criminally understudied areas in human existence. Something I hear all the time is that romance novels increase the reader's empathy.
The world's obsession with empathy is just drives me nuts, because women have a natural tendency towards empathy more than men. And it's not something they need to learn or be taught. It's something that they just have inherently. And when they go off the deep end or off the reservation or whatever, that's when it becomes a problem. And it's a problem also when guys do it that way as well. But because women are more naturally inclined towards it, it's going to have a more naturally inclined issue. So it could be better.
I doubt it's that simple, but let's say it is. Women are empathetic by default. That is not something that romance literature gives women. It heightens it.
I guess I spoke too soon. She already covers that.
Certainly, but as in all emotions, a heightened state of anything is usually very bad. Heightened empathy reduces a person's logical response and cognitive reasoning. It makes it difficult to regulate the emotional response with reason. Heightened states of empathy have been found to contribute to pain, depression, anxiety, emotional overinvolvement.
I will say I don't resonate with this nearly as much because I'm not a very empathetic person. I'm purely logical. I can understand through logic how you came to the conclusion you came to, or through the reasons as why you behave the way you behave, purely from a logical or psychological perspective. But I wouldn't have necessarily empathy. And it's not I don't want to. It's not that I don't need to. It's I don't know how to. It's not something I cognitively have access to. I can't just, it's not a switch I can just flip on and, oh, I'm empathetic now. Yeah. Like that's just, this is not how it works for me specifically. A lot of other people, they typically have a better shake at it than I do. But this type of stuff, I don't know. Like my wife sometimes says, like, I think you're depressed. I'm like, because I don't sleep. If I didn't sleep well, or if work's annoying me, I don't understand depression. I don't understand anxiety. I don't understand stress. I don't like stress. And the only thing that I can think of that relates to stress is inside of me, there's something that makes my breathing a little bit more erratic. But it's like it's barely there. It's like a burning sensation that makes your breathing erratic. That's how I would describe anxiety, but I don't really understand it. I don't know why. And I'm a very laid back person. So when something is causing stress, or what I deem would be equivalent to stress, I immediately like push it away, or I shut it down and squash it. Like, I'm not going to be stressed. You're not going to stress me out, because I don't desire to be stressed out. I desire to have a good day. And even if I go in the day, man, today's going to suck, I still desire to have a good day. But this kind of stuff, I don't understand. Like, I've had instances in my life where I'm like, did I actually have a traumatic experience? And I have not figured out in my head yet how to express it. Because people say, oh, like, well, you said this, that, or the other. It's like, well, maybe because I actually experienced it in that way. And I can now recognize that when it happened, I didn't realize that I was being traumatized. Now I'm there and I realize, oh wow, I'm traumatized by that. And now when that instance appears again, it bothers me. But I didn't know why it was bothering me. And I don't know. The way this is affecting women, obviously, because they're more empathetic, is going to be different for me. But I can understand that they read this stuff, like what she's saying is you read this stuff, you consumed it, and then this is all the stuff that happens. I can logically understand this from like a research perspective. It's just for me, I can't understand it naturally. So I have to either have it explained to me, like my wife saying, I think you're depressed. Why am I depressed then? She's like, I don't know. Why are you depressed? I'm like, I don't know. Like, why am I depressed? I didn't realize I was depressed. And it's just like, it is what it is.
Burnout, vicarious trauma, and post traumatic stress disorder. I mean, right out of the gate, the fact that romance books heighten empathy in readers, is proof that despite the intentions of the writers, these books arouse readers, whether they want to be aroused or not, which is an unsettling thought all by itself.
It sounds a lot like book grape, but not the contents as much as the effect it has on you. But I also think it's a little weird that, you're reading something and you're expecting to or not expecting to. And this is why it's like, if you want something wholesome, you read Chronicles of Narnia, Tolkien's work, you can even touch into Wheel of Time. It's got a little bit of not kid friendly, but it's written in a way that a kid probably wouldn't pick up on it unless they were already exposed to that content.
So, imagine you're a young woman and you're reading a steamy romance in which the main female character is being mistreated in some way by the male character, and this female character feels arousal at this mistreatment. Written well, this arousal on the part of the female character will trigger empathetic arousal in the female reader. A young, inexperienced woman will then be troubled trying to understand why she's feeling aroused by what is borderline abusive behavior. However, the story will continue in this vein until the man and woman are living happily ever after. The moment of joy at the end is the emotional climax that is essential for a woman to fully enjoy an erotic romance. And no, I'm not saying.
And maybe, and I wonder sometimes, because thankfully I've never had to experience this, but if a woman's complaining that, I mean, we're going to get into real talk here. So if you have young ears, please shut them off. I mean, you probably should be considering the title of this particular video. You probably shouldn't be exposing young ears to it anyway. But if a woman's struggling to hit her peak, so to speak, I'm wondering if it's because she's desensitized to the natural aspect. And say it from more of a, whether it be like therapy, counseling, sexual rehab, etc., whatever perspective, when people come in and say, hey, I've been I've been experiencing X, Y, and Z, and it's like, okay, well, did you have this kind of content? Or from the flip side, couple that's never had sex before they got married, and then they come in, they're like, it's been endless. Like we don't have any problems whatsoever because their own experience hasn't been distorted by these kind of things. It hasn't started mocking those notches up higher and outside of the range they are possibly capable of. So I'm wondering if that's the case, that is that way.
saying women are super weak or something like that. But I think we can all agree that strong emotions are exhausting no matter who you are, and women are more prone to feel emotions strongly. An empathetic response to a romance book will result in an emotional roller coaster designed specifically to ensnare the tastes of women in such a way that their emotional involvement in a story will tend to be more intensive than a man's on average. Add to that the sexual infatuation triggered by the addictive erotic release of the extremely explicit scenes, which also takes a toll on the mind, whether you enjoy these scenes or not.
And I think that's kind of what I was getting at, is that maybe people who struggle are because they're either more promiscuous than they probably should be if they're wanting a healthy sex life, and also what the content they're reading, the things they're viewing, when they, it's like when you, like you're walking down the street at a park or something and you see like you just had a massive breakup and you're depressed because, you know, like, oh, my girl dumped me, or my boyfriend dumped me, blah 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 blah, and then you see happy couples everywhere. It depresses you even more because what you're seeing is what you wish you had. Or if you see, you know, a couple acting really frisky in public, or you happen to catch a glimpse of them not in public but out in public, um, and you're like, oh man, I'd kill to have somebody like that in my life. Well, that's you building up an expectation or a psychological positioning, and when you don't reach it, when you're not meeting that quote unquote need, you're going to be disappointed. And it's like, well, maybe that's why so many women are complaining about this. Maybe that's why they don't have that satisfaction with their partner.
Especially if you do. I don't really understand why more people aren't aware of how intensely bad these books are for women's minds. I don't I don't really read romance.
I don't think corn in general is healthy for minds. And I'm pretty sure they have lots of studies to show that it's not. So it's not surprising that somebody with a brain would not support that content.
Smutty or otherwise, but I did read quite a few of these books when I was trying to understand the genre better. And something that really surprised me was how huge of an emotional impact they had on me, despite the fact that I didn't care about these characters. And
Maybe that's why I'd be okay if I read them because I don't have that emotional thing. I'm just like, I don't care. like, oh man, now they're about to have steam sex. I don't care. Oh man, they're about to. I literally just don't care. Now, for her, I feel a little concerned because even though she knows what the stuff is, she knows the studies, and she still reads them anyway, she knows she's putting herself in a dangerous position. And that's kind of why I admire her, because she's doing this against what is for her better end goal, her better nature. And I appreciate that because she knows she's doing it. She knows it's going to affect her. She doesn't want it to affect her, but she realizes that subconsciously there's going to be something affecting her. So hopefully she had a really good like bleach out session where she just gets it out of her system by reading good books that don't have that kind of content in them.
despite the fact that they were all mostly happy endings and everything else, I was legitimately depressed during the few weeks when I was reading these books. I was having trouble focusing on my work, I was having trouble sleeping, I was even having trouble eating, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong until it dawned on me that my mind was basically being ripped around a female specific roller coaster that was designed to trigger the most extreme emotional and chemical reaction in my mind, short of actually doing drugs. Interestingly, the reaction I experienced was the same reaction men talk about when they watch filmed explicit content: the depression, the difficulty focusing, the lethargy. Women who are addicted to this sexually explicit fiction.
It's going to go back to the whole somebody, man or a woman, is consuming content that is something they desire to have. They desire, whether it's the taboo, or whether it's even just like a healthy relationship. Like, I just wish I could find a girlfriend and we could have sex, or I wish I could get married and have sex, or I wish I could find a boyfriend and I wish we could have sex. I wish I had found a husband and we could have sex. Yada yada yada. It's just, there's something that they're experiencing in real life, and they're kind of like, I really, really, really want someone to desire me, and I really, really, really wanted to desire somebody else, and they're not getting it, which is going to be the depression. It's going to knock them down a peg or two or three or four or so on and so forth.
Don't even realize that they're literally addicted to, adult entertainment. Without exception, men who are addicted to watching explicit content are viewed as bad. I shouldn't have to tell anyone watching this video how bad that is for the mind. It just happens that all the language surrounding this accepted fact says men's minds, how bad it is for men, how much damage it does to men. There have been countless studies done on the negative impact watching this stuff has on.
And that's the thing, is that we're saying it's all bad for men, men bad, men bad, men bad, over and over again, and how dare you consume this content, and then we just, like, women just go in there and do it. The same exact thing, essentially, and we're looking at it like, oh, we don't need to talk about that. We don't need to talk about that, because you kill an entire industry if you did.
Men's physical health. And
I mean, I don't know if it would kill it per se, because the women who even the women who recognized it and tried to pull away from it would still be pulled back in because it's an addiction.
And mental health, on their relationships, friendships, professional lives, and on their character. But basically, zero such studies have been done on women. Part of this is because most researchers won't acknowledge that women's addiction to erotic fiction is in any way comparable to a man's addiction to filmed erotic media. Part of it is because there's so much feminist armor packed around women's erotica that even if a woman were to watch the hub 10 hours a day, she would still somehow be protected by the fact that she's like empowering herself, or I don't know, exploring her sexuality. For social political reasons,
Why can't men be empowered or explore their sexuality?
Most people won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. When it comes to men, this kind of content is known to have an enormous negative impact on their daily lives. Therefore, there are countless resources out there to help men kick that habit and restore sanity to their lives. There's also a lot of shame among men. Men will mock other men for their addiction to this stuff. But for women, nothing. There are no resources to help women kick their addiction to erotic literature, at least none that I could find, and any woman who feels shame when reading this stuff is said to be suffering from internalized misogyny and is advised to focus on overcoming the stigma by, reading more of these books.
They're called industry shills trying to keep making money.
Other women will help her in this endeavor. To this end, there are romance book clubs with completely expected names in which the pursuit of women's fiction can be enjoyed without shame. I read one account from a young woman who said that when she realized she was addicted, she sought help from a therapist who treated the matter as if it was nothing serious at all. No different from, like, a chocolate addiction. Addiction to...
A chocolate addiction is way healthier, just put it that way.
Pardon me. Appreciation of erotic literature is presented to women as female empowerment, and whatever various other hot words are part of the current feminist lexicon. If a woman were to express discomfort with the proliferation and increasing intensity of sexually explicit material in women's fiction, she is painted as an enemy, a prude, or, my personal favorite, a slave to the patriarchy. They'll say it allows women...
I mean, aren't we all a slave to the patriarchy, even the patriarchs? Which is kind of ironic if you think about it. Like, how does one not be a slave to the thing that everybody claims is there, but then nobody can find? It's a very strange position to be in. Oh no. Anyway.
To explore their sexuality in a safe space. I'm pretty sure you could also say that men on the hub are exploring their sexuality in a safe space. I don't know. To which women will often argue, well, that kind of content, the stuff on the hub, is unethical.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
But that erotic literature, if they even concede that it's the same kind of content, is somehow ethical, meaning that, I'm assuming, no actors or actresses were harmed in its making. Be that as...
If it's on the hub, probably no actors or actresses were harmed in the making.
It may, the making of the explicit content is a separate issue from its consumption. I'm sure you
Or the content itself, for that matter.
could find an ethical and environmentally friendly way to make heroin wouldn't make it a good thing for me to consume it. A lot of people these days talk about how
I mean, a heroin addict would say, yes, it is.
social bias prevented women from enjoying romance literature. Well, now the social moral landscape has shifted again.
Social bias. Oh, you mean kind of like men watching corn? Oh, okay.
If you're a woman and you're not a proud champion of smut, then you're the enemy of women. In general, though, I
Or you could just have standards. There's that too.
think the so-called social bias surrounding romance novels isn't much different from the bias surrounding all commercial fiction. I also don't think that's done that much to stop women from mass consuming romance novels. Champions of romance novels will present the acceptance of smut as crucial to female empowerment and independence.
They still haven't defined to me, at least, what empowerment even is. So,
This is categorically false, and
yes.
in fact, I think I've shown how the opposite is true. But women will nevertheless be banished from female society by other women if they dare to disagree. Men, typically, who watch hardcore stuff or who are addicted to it, are ashamed of it. Women who are addicted to reading, as they call it, smut, are supposed to be proud of it. None of these women will allow any talk of shame. But here's the thing: shame is not a bad thing. Shame is how our brains tell us we're doing something that will harm us. If we feel shame eating that fourth slice of triple chocolate cake in one sitting, that's our brain telling us that this is bad for our health.
Also, if all the non-smut women came together and shamed the women that were into smut and somehow peer pressured them in it's oddly enough a healthy way, then we could potentially fix the crisis because there'd be less money made off of it. And then with less money being made off of it, they'd have to bring back the normal publishing gig, not just an ideological focused one. Not saying that smut in general would disappear forever, not saying that romance novels would cease to exist. People would still do it probably in the secret of their home, but people would be more ashamed of it, and as like a society, which would remove it from basically the same way that men are removed from the corn stuff.
We feel shame because we haven't exercised in over 6 months. That's our brain telling us that we need physical exercise of some kind. If we feel shame when we take in hardcore explicit material, that's our brain telling us that this is going to harm us in some way and we need to stop. This is our brain trying to save us. Eventually, anyone
The same way pain sensors in your fingers are there, well, pain sensors in general, but pain sensors in your fingers are there to tell you to stop doing what you're doing when you stick your hand on a stovetop that's on and it's hot and your fingers are scalding and you have blisters and whatnot forming. The pain is telling you, stop, don't do that. It's not good for you. This is going to hurt us. And I say us in the royal we in terms of the pain sensors are a part of you, so they don't want to be hurt. You don't want to be hurt. That's the royal us.
one can be desensitized to shame, but the effort to desensitize women to shame has been a lot more intensive than it has been for men.
Because if you can desensitize women to shame, but you can still shame men, then you can control society through women, which is weird because I thought it was a patriarchy.
Because historically, women have led the charge against indecent or sexually explicit material. So shame in women cuts into hardcore film producers and women's lit publishers' bottom line. Removing shame from women's minds doesn't just prevent them from bullying hardcore erotica production out of the mainstream, it mobilizes 50% of the spending force of the book market to obsessively consume something that is dangerously addictive. This is a huge reason why it's becoming increasingly common for harder and harder content in books to be made available to a younger and younger audience, especially a young female audience.
Yeah, what happens if they start putting romantic-y smut stuff in teen novels, which they kind of do already? Not necessarily romantic-y, but they put the smut stuff in it because they're trying to normalize gender queer ideology or, that kind of stuff. And how long until it's in the kids' books? Will parents be abhorred by that happening, or are they going to be like, oh, I read that stuff when I was a kid too? And then you have the slippery slope that just drops us into the depths of the ocean. And I don't know if there's a way to come back from that except for the younger generations on their own being appalled by this and redirecting the course.
You see incredibly steamy makeout scenes in books marketed to 12-year-old girls. Caraval, for example, has 2 prolonged passages that read like weird hand fetish scenes. This isn't some kind of accidental slip of the pen. This is intentional. Famously, Sarah J. Maas only allowed her book to be marketed to a YA audience if they didn't cut out any of the explicit material. Slap a feminist female empowerment sticker on the thing and you've got social moral armor no one is willing to touch, not even other women. Something I hear a lot.
Which is kind of stupid if you think about it, because it just means that you don't actually have principles if you're not willing to stand on it. And yes, people can have principles and still screw up, but they still want and desire to hold to those principles, even if they do fail to do so from time to time. But if you're consistently failing to uphold those principles, in every sense of the word, if you're not willing to protect your children from this, I mean, crying out loud, protecting your young adults, like actually adults, like in the early 20s or something, and be like, look, it's not good for you to consume this stuff because consuming this stuff is going to have detrimental problems and issues with your growth for like your brain, your ability to reason, your ability to emotionally relate to somebody, your ability, all these things are going to be harmed by this. So it's better if you don't consume this. And the funny part is, they aren't missing anything of value or worth by not consuming it. That's the best part. There's literally nothing they're missing out on. So they can't be like, but all my friends, who cares? Your friends are going to be brain dead. They're not going to think. They have the brain rot, the TikTok brain. Do you want to be compared to them? Like,
is that this is all the result of women taking over literature. I definitely see the point, but I was curious if that was true. So I, took to the internet. The percentage of female authors as of 2019, which was the most recent number I could find, any further statistics were likely behind this mother of all paygates, was 50.5%, which was also fairly steady from 2010 to 2019. The percentage of female editors as of 2021 was 67%. Funnily enough,
which kind of disappoints me because I wanted to be a female. I didn't want to be. I wanted to be a male editor, not a male editor. I just wanted to be an editor. I happen to be male, and I wanted to be able to help people unleash their best works. But when you look at, if you go to like a Fiverr or any of the main places you would go for editors, it's like 90% women. There's very few men on those places because they're not going to get very much work. It's a sad reality, and it makes me not so happy.
That's not that big of an increase from 2010 when the number was 64%. The percentage of female literary agents as of 2021 was 58%, which is actually a decline from 2010 when the number was 64%. So that's people.
It's because they stopped being editors and they started being authors.
Now, what about the books that are actually being read? Let's look at the New York Times bestseller list for the last 4.5 years. In 2020, out of 34 best-selling authors, 16 were women. In 2021, 21 out of 37 were women. In 2022, 12 out of 22 were women. In 2023, 11 out of 24. In 2024, 17 out of 32. And so far in 2025, it's been about 8 out of 13. The point of all these numbers is to say that statistically women don't dominate the literary world. That said, in many ways, the numbers here don't quite represent the reality. No matter what the numbers say for bestsellers, if you actually look at the list, you can see that romance, especially smutty romance and romantasy, dominate huge blocks of the calendar. And a lot of these female writers have female agents. And obviously, readers of these books will be predominantly
They have female agents, female editors, yada, yada, yada.
Female. So women might not quite statistically dominate the literary world, but the literary world, nevertheless, seems to have taken a very particular female leaning. I take issue with my own phrasing here a little. I would say that there are definitely other types of female writers working today, but the idea that this is somehow an example of typically female writing or a typically female writer is something I find incredibly frustrating and just a little bit insulting. But here's the thing. This fact, the fact that women dominate the literary industry, is not what created this problem. This problem has existed for a long time. What problem am I talking about? Call it what you want, but let's just say it's the widespread and constantly increasing reliance on explicitly sexual content to sell books, at least in part. You know, this novel is seductive and compelling, or a meditation on the erotic, or an erotic black comedy, or a tour de force of erotic realism, or a book in which seduction beats suspense. And these are not recent.
I would also argue that's one of the reasons I came across Game of Thrones and didn't really jump into it, is because it was all about shock value. It was, oh, well, you can't have you can't have incest or child violence. And child violence didn't particularly bother me that it was in the story. I mean, obviously, I don't like the child violence, but the fact that it was in a story and it creates the character of a character, so you know that they're kind of a villainous in a way, um, like pushing a kid outside of a window and they fall and then they can't walk anymore. It's like, okay, well, that's the sexual content, the overdoing it, like the heavy emphasis on like a brothel or something like that, the sexual content was just kind of like, yeah, it's not the largest part of the Game of Thrones series. The political backstabbing by far is, but it had a larger role rather than being like a backdrop. Like, oh, they walked into a brothel, they had a conversation with uh, a prostitute, and then they had a secret meeting in the back, and then they left the brothel. More straightforward cut. Like the place, yeah, it's a brothel. Yeah, it's got prostitutes. Yeah, there's sex going on. But it's not like walking into a room full of like an orgy happening, sitting in the middle of the orgy and having a cup of tea as you eat tea with crumpets and have a conversation with your friend as an orgy is going on around you. Like, that's just there because they're trying to sell sex because sex sells. Whereas Wheel of Time, they skip all of it. The nudity is mostly cultural. Actually, most of it, if not all of it, is cultural aspect, or accidental from a villainous perspective. And then they just kind of gloss over it, and it's implied, it's not shown. It's the tell, not show, because it's not content that needs to be shown for you to know that it's there. Because the reader's not an idiot. Right, readers? You're not idiots, right?
Books. Some of these were published over 20 or 30 years ago. It's there visually too, like the naked woman on the cover of Jaws, this cover of Windmills of the Gods, or the old pulpy covers of sword and sorcery paperbacks. The thing is, a lot of these books that had these blurbs and these terrible covers usually had very limited sex in the books.
Hi, Sissy.
And when it did appear, it kind of just came out of nowhere. The reality is, however, that no matter what the writers thought, the publishers knew that a little sprinkling of sex would let them mention it in the publicity, and that would boost sales. After a few generations cycle through this system, using sex to sell an otherwise mediocre or even terrible book is not even something that's questioned. For that matter, using sex to sell an excellent book isn't even questioned. Eventually, you reach a point where sex is the main point of the book.
It's the main seller. It's no longer an addition or a subplot.
Trying to say here is that the current year situation did not arise entirely out of thin air.
Like, how many women go read a Sarah J. Maas book and say, oh, I love this fantasy plot. I love how the characters go and conquer the bad guys, blah, 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 blah. Now they're like, oh, I can't wait to see what kind of spicy scenes are in it. That's...
Second women started to dominate literature, everything became smut. I would concede that everything has become women-centric smut, or you could say smut written for women by women. But this issue, this almost virulent proliferation of smut, as it were, in literature has been a thing for a long time. The main difference is that previously some books were written by men and some by women. On top of that, the overall quality used to be higher, so the sex didn't really stand out, nor were the publishers leaning as heavily on the explicit content to sell the books, given that the books and the authors were generally of a higher quality in and of themselves. I can't read the minds of the women who wrote articles like these ones, but I'd guess that a major complaint a lot of these women really had when it came right down to it was that the sex written by the men didn't really appeal to them. Is the issue that the sex isn't universally appealing? Or is the issue that sex as a selling point for fiction has become one of the most important aspects of the reading experience? And if that's true, why is that? I've read so many essays and articles and quotes written by men and women over the years who talk like sex is literally a mandatory element of fiction, whether it's a writer talking about how books without sex are insincere, or Philip Pullman, who
What?
apparently can't figure out where elf babies come from unless he can read an explicit account of the moment of conception.
Yeah, those people are stupid. No, I'll go a step further. Those people are retarded. Because if somebody's like, I had a child, well, how did that happen? How do you think it happened? Well, I don't know. You have to tell me. I'm too stupid to understand. How? Please, give me explicit detail. Leave no suspense. Just fill in all the blanks because I'm too retarded to be able to actually understand myself because I'm a dirty pervert.
Things like this are so incredibly
Which is ironic, considering that anime fans are always called perverts because there's a panty shot here or fan service there or a whole bunch of other things. Okay.
silly to me. I'm tempted to make a joke about Philip Pullman being unable to comprehend where the people he sees on the street come from unless he watched the act of conception with his own eyes.
I think he still believes it's the what is it? The not a pelican. Crane? Is it a crane? What's the bird that delivers them? Wow, I don't even remember. I've been indoctrinated by biology. I don't know how to do it. Fairy tales anymore. Yeah, how they get delivered by the big bird. It carries a little bundle and it has the baby in it. Whatever the frick the thing's called.
But there's no way he's that stupid. I mean,
Never expect. You can never expect someone's intelligence is higher than their own words.
that sincerely, there's no way. In which case, the
He's also a pervert.
only other explanation is that he's just trying to make an excuse for how badly he wants there to be lots of sex in books for him to both read and write.
Or get himself off.
In that sense, one could argue that as ludicrous and worrying as it is that women are becoming so obsessed with the smut in their fiction, at least they're not pretending that they're in it for anything else. So many writers have repeated
Because they're not in it for anything else.
the same nonsensical argument.
If you took basically the entire story, cut it out, and only left like the little contextual snippets, that's all they would read. That's all they would need.
That because sex is a natural part of the human condition, failing to include it in your novel would make it unrealistic or disingenuous. What strikes me the most about this argument is the lack of self-awareness. Bowel movements are also a natural part of the human condition, but I don't see people using bowel movement scenes to sell books. I also don't see that many bowel movements in romantasy. For that matter, childbirth is also a natural part of the human condition. And while that's a bit more likely to make it into a novel than a bowel movement, it also doesn't get championed the way sex does. Gosh, I wonder why that is. Listen, I'm not saying sex is bad and you can't put it in your book. I don't really care. What I am saying is that this ludicrous argument that books without sex are somehow bad is intolerably false. These people fail to recognize that they just sound like a writer or a reader who's mad because they didn't get to read a super poetic description of boobs in this spy thriller. I'm sorry, but it just...
Cue the millions of people who freak out every time Robert Jordan has a woman cross her arms beneath her breasts or smooths her skirts or any of that stuff because they just can't handle it. But please, describe boobs more. Describe sexual activity more. The idiocy is palpable.
Comes across like that guy who's mad because there are too many articles in this month's Playboy, or that fangirl who's upset because her favorite idol's outfit didn't reveal enough leg. Like, at a certain point, you've got to stop and ask yourself, wait, why is the sex scene so important to me? Why does it matter how round this random female character's boobs are? Why does this author feel the need to describe what this guy's hands taste like? If you put so much emphasis on using sex to sell books, then a huge chunk of people who buy the books will expect sex. Every time the cycle repeats, the amount of sex...
And they'll care less and less the more books you make about the quality of your book and only care about the quality of your sex. And if you start writing the sex bad, they're going to dump you and move on to somebody else. But you're also building the level of expectation so high from them that it doesn't matter anymore what you're doing.
Increases and the level of quality decreases. If this cycle repeats enough times, everyone stops noticing how important the sex has become to the whole process. They also stop noticing how low the overall quality of the books has become. If the reader is expecting a little sex, then the publishers can add a little more to make the book stand out from the crowd, and so on until we get to. And
This is why you don't let publishers write books.
and so on. But I mean,
they're terrible at it.
Sex has become increasingly centric in literature for the last century, going as far back as the likes of Lady Chatterley's Lover and James Joyce's Ulysses, and even farther back to Fanny Hill, and let's not forget our boy the Marquis. Of course, these older examples tended to get themselves a tiny bit banned, while Lady Chatterley's Lover and Ulysses both tried to make some kind of ironically righteous First Amendment case for erotica being a super important form of art or whatever. But again,
I mean, husband and wife are in a bedroom, they can make all sorts of art and nobody's going to think about it.
who do you suppose benefited from the legalization of explicit content in books? Human society or publishers? The
Publishers and perverts.
debate about whether or not wildly explicit material is protected by the American First Amendment has been renewed in recent years, but I do find it interesting that those who argue the strongest for it are making a shocking amount of money. The main issue I'm trying to make here is twofold. One, sex on the level we see in books like this and this has actually been normal for a long time, not just in bodice
Notice the Stephen King It book there? Notice that one?
but in highbrow award-winning literature. So much so that when this issue took off and I started seeing people everywhere complaining or at least expressing alarm at romantasy, while I didn't disagree, I completely agree, I was still pretty surprised. Hadn't we, as a reading society, decided decades ago that we were all apparently perfectly fine with insane amounts of sexual obsession in our fiction? I'm pretty sure we had. The second issue I want to mention is that
I don't remember.
even though
I didn't read books for sex. I read books for the adventure and battles. Big battles. Lots of dudes dying. Demise Wells.
female aspect of this whole thing has a very distinctive look to it. Men have also been writing piles of smut-esque literature for just as long. As I said at the beginning, I don't find this to be a women in literature problem. I look at this as a smut in literature problem, for lack of a better term. I think it's worth noting that highbrow literature has always had more sex in it, while commercial fiction has tended to have less. I think a big reason that this has become such a major issue that so many people are noticing is that the commercial fiction is now just as smutty and explicit as highbrow literature has been for a long time. The other day I was reading a book by Paul Auster. This guy is a novelist, one of the respected literary giants of his generation, legitimately a good writer, or I should say a good put together of words and sentences, if you will. Not 20 pages into this book and his character was constantly examining his genitals. He was imagining what any random woman looked like naked the minute he met her, and every character, male and female, had to make sure their sexual habits and tastes were on the page within the course of the first meeting. This is the kind of thing that was much more common in books, especially literary fiction written by men, something you could almost...
I mean, there are people like that, to be fair, but it's not a very large percentage, I don't think.
...call ambient explicitness, or even sometimes ambient perversion. It was there always on almost every...
And you can make ambient perversion and make it funny. Like the anime Golden Boy, perfect example. It's literally nonstop perversion, but he's also a good character, and the girls actually fall for him because he's sincere. He is a pervert, but he's an honorable pervert. And there's no sex, but there is fan service. And it revolves around that, but it's a comedy ultimately.
Page, no matter what the book was about. I personally find this kind of writing tasteless and baffling, but I do think that we as a society became desensitized to it. Now, women reading explicit fiction or fiction with extremely explicit elements are also becoming increasingly desensitized.
I mean, some people might call it tasteless, others might call it, okay, whatever the situation might be. But one thing is for sure, we're not selling Playboys next to USA Today. We're not. Why? Because it's graphic content, regardless of the articles or anything like that. Sissy, will you stop putting your head against my mic and moving it, please? You're such a weird cat. Anyway, you're not putting Playboys next to that because it's not content designed for public use. But now we're publicizing. I think that's a proper word for this use in the sentence. We're making it very public about smut. Like, we're making it very obvious now. It's no longer, you got to go in the back room for it. Now it's in the freaking window, and you're walking by a store and you're like, oh, well, would you look at that? Like, that's what's normal now.
That's why you can look up things like spice meters. Do you want a book to, read one-handed, or do you just want to read a story?
You use your hands to read books?
Well, the spice is going to be there regardless, but here you can at least gauge the quantity based on the specific level of desensitization you've reached. Men have been putting tasteless and excessive sex in books for a long time. Just because women are the ones writing it doesn't mean it's not also tasteless. And it also doesn't mean that many...
I want to know what the definition of tasteless is. Is it just descriptive, or is it, like, useless? Like, it doesn't play a part of the plot. It's just there to get somebody's jimmies off. Is that what she's talking about?
Male writers aren't just as obsessed with sex.
I didn't really like the books I read in school because there was never any magic, but there was...
She definitely looks like a wine mom. Probably without the kids, though.
Really, like, not enough kissing for me.
Well, I'm saying, where are the giant snakes? Where are the scantily clad women?
Anyone who has tried...
To be fair, George R. R. Martin, as much as I don't like him, giant snakes, scantily clad women's literally just the old school fantasy, power fantasy stuff. Like, that's what you'd expect. Like Conan the Barbarian. That's what you would expect. He just takes it a step further.
To read a book off the shelf in Barnes & Noble in the last 5 years does not need to be told that the quality of Western literature is in decline. This is true across the board, and there are a million factors that have contributed to this, but like it or not, sex is one of them. The more you let sex sell the story, the less concerned you'll be with the quality of the story. Sex sells, as we all know. It sells so well that if you want, you can ignore most everything else. The bodice rippers of the past and the romantasy genre now, and their shocking success, has proven that.
So what happens when somebody just starts writing books where there's no plot, there's no story, it's just a character wakes up, screws somebody, leaves there, goes get some coffee, meets somebody, takes them in the bathroom, screws them there, goes out, goes down the store to the grocery store, picks out some fruits and vegetables, jacks himself off in the freaking bathroom or in the middle of the aisle, and they go off and they find somebody else and they screw them, and then by the end of the night they're at a club and then now they're screwing somebody, and that's just literally the plot. That's literally going to be it the entire time. It's just they're going to have nothing but sex with as many people, just different people, and in different ways the entire book, and that's the book. There's not going to be a plot. There's not going to be they're growing as a character so they can get a job promotion, or they have a goal of getting a house, being independent financially, whatever the case may be. And that's just like the modern stuff. If you look at the fantasy stuff, it's like, well, they want to go slay a dragon, or they want to save a damsel in distress, or they want to find some magic items so they can fight the demon king. The basic kind of stuff. Like, it's going to just stop being that.
If the sex is explicit enough, tantalizing enough, controversial enough, nothing else matters. If you put a stack of books on the table and tell people the ones with the purple covers have lots of sex, the unfortunate reality is that those are the ones that will sell out first.
I did not know that was a thing. Apparently now I learned something.
Industry knows this. It's hard work to find good writers. It's hard work to write a good novel.
And yes, I have watched this before. I don't remember everything. It helps freshen my mind so I can respond newer.
Hard work to edit it well and then market it. Putting really explicit sex in the book means that the story doesn't have to be that great. It means you can cut all the other corners. It means people won't really be paying attention to the prose or the grammar. It means that all you'll have to do is slap a blurb on the cover that says something like, "Summer's steamiest read," and you're golden. Although, of course, because of the nature...
Slap that on a Lego book. Somebody buys it, it's disappointed, it's just Legos and how to build things.
Human beings' interaction with explicit content.
Are people really to that point where it's just that simple? You just throw some stupid crap on it and it sells the book.
The sex you put in your stories in order to sell them will necessarily have to be more and more extreme. Of course,
that's what I was saying earlier.
This doesn't mean that every book that has ever had explicit sex in it has been otherwise bad. Quite the contrary. Sex often seems to have been shoehorned into otherwise good books. But one does wonder if all this literarily acceptable sex perhaps paved the way for a world of this and this and this. Is smut
What? Okay.
only reprehensible if it's
Wow.
badly written? Is it only reprehensible if it's on the bestseller list? Or is all this a symptom of a much, much larger social disease that has been degrading our culture for a very, very long time? The reality is that sex
Perverts. Yes. Yes, perverts.
is 100% optional. And even then, there are times when the story might benefit
Shout out to Robert Jordan and Wheel of Time.
from skipping the sex. And also, this bears repeating, there's literally never a good enough plot reason to describe every single action, motion, and sensation of a sex scene. There just isn't.
I mean, if it's a story about like brothel workers, like prostitutes and whatnot, and they're doing like the stories about like their quality of, you know, being the best prostitute in the brothel, and another could be, I'm taking this to like anime levels of silliness of competitions where like they have school competitions and all the different volleyball or basketball or football or soccer groups are all like competing, or even music industry and whatnot. It's like if the brothels are like, we're having a countrywide or nationwide or, you know, international, you know, sexathon thing to show like we're the best ones, and you have to kind of detail like to explain how somebody is good at their craft, then yeah, you could do it in that. I don't think it's a very good story, but you could do it in that.
Does that mean all sex in fiction is bad? No, of course not. Does that mean that all books that have sex in them are bad? Again, of course not. But unlike some authors who seem to believe that a book can't exist without explicit content, I am of the mind that certain things are better handled with restraint. As I said before, the largest
Restraint.
group of people who have worked so tirelessly to normalize the consumption of erotic media are people whose sole motivation is profit. They do not care about female empowerment. They don't even care about female health. They just care about female money. So I think it might be time for females to
Which is funny because you think, you don't love me for me, you just love me for my money. And that upsets women, but when it comes to books, it doesn't upset them at all.
wake up. But while women are waking up, maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing for the gents to also take stock. I hesitate to
The gents are taking stock, and they're really annoyed that there's nothing for them to read because it's all this. It's all romantasy everywhere. Book publishers aren't helping out the guys in any shape or form. Unless the guys are trying to get in bed with a woman, and then they can just, by this nonsense, talk about it a little bit and get the woman excited and hot and bothered.
tell people what to do to fix this. It's
And if that actually works, I would be very shocked, but I'm sure somebody out there will try it.
easy to talk about the problem. Well, maybe not easy, but not difficult in the same way. You know that old thing that was everywhere a few years ago? You know, you have two wolves fighting inside you, and the one that wins is the one that you feed. We all have so much inside us, impulses to good
It's the one that pulls out the shank at the last moment.
and to bad. Pulls to be selfish, pulls to be courageous or deviant or compassionate or lazy. And whatever we feed day to day is what we become. If we feed the impulse to obsess over sex, that's what we will become. And on a long enough timeline, we'll become a perverted sex addict. The same goes for society. Maybe
Sadly enough, some people don't think that's a bad thing.
things in literature are the way they are because we've been feeding perversion for too long. Now there are no other strong hungers, no hunger for powerful storytelling, for aspirational heroes, for nuanced characters, beautiful prose, and so on. It's like society has become the monkey that pushes the pleasure button instead of the food button until it dies. Maybe we should consider starving that particular hunger and see what happens. As always, thank you so much for watching.
Yup. Yup. And you can check her out, Hilary Lane. I'll have a link down below to the video and to her channel, which is The Second Story. I really like her content. It's legit. And there's a couple other reactions I think I want to do for her because she does good content. So yeah. I pretty much said everything I could say. Ultimately, it comes down to, is society going to bend over and take it from itself? Are they going to bring back shame? Are they going to bring back like, caring about the content in the books. Do we care what bookstores carry anymore? Do we want our kids reading this stuff? Do we want our younger children to read this stuff? Do we want our teenagers to read this? Like, what's the point? There's other ways to go about this, so like I don't understand why this should be the go-to. And if you were to pursue this kind of content, there's plenty of it that's in the hardcore section or whatever of that type of stuff that's not like everywhere. Like, you can still get it. It's just it won't be the obvious stuff. And it's still not good for society as a whole in the long run. But if somebody's like looking to get off from something, you can do better than just ruining the fantasy genre to do so. But Gooner's gonna goon, I suppose. But yeah, so that's it for that video. So thanks everybody for checking it out. If it intrigued you or you thought something was thought-provoking, whether by myself or Hilary herself, feel free to leave a comment below. Go to her video and leave a comment. You'll probably get a lot more to read on hers. But yes, I am curious as your thoughts, whether it be from a man's perspective or a woman's perspective. I don't really care where it comes from as much as the thought itself, and is it thought-provoking or whatnot. So we'll go ahead and leave it there. Check the description for all the usuals of content creators to support or check out and support. Check out the businesses / websites and stuff that have stuff that are supportive of our corner of the internet, and the interwebs, and support them if you deem it worth your time or something you're interested in. So thanks everybody for hanging out. Remember, my friends, walk in the light.